Forward the light brigade! Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Dares not to make reply, dares not to reason why, dares but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. The immortal words of the second paragraph, stanza, whatever you want to call it, of Alfred Lord Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. Interestingly enough, the RN built the forward class, arguably to avoid a repeat of such a thing. Honestly, they build the scout cruisers because they want to give their destroyers some protection. Again, this is the first generation, before the Town class come, etc., of torpedo boat destroyers. Well, torpedo boat destroyers. We've talked about them in the Duke of Edinburgh class. We've talked about them in the other things, and then come in the forward class and the scout cruisers. And principally, their entire purpose is to stop a repeat of the charge of Light Brigade in naval terms. It's to give the destroyers a chance. They're going to be in light ships charging into rapid-firing guns and heavy guns to launch torpedoes, which are impossibly devastating, but require you to get really far closer than we'd always imagined. These are not long-lance torpedoes by any stretch of the imagination in order to have a chance of hitting. Which means you either have to send impossibly massive numbers and accept astronomical casualties in order to guarantee a hit, or you have to give them another edge. You have to give them a tip of the spear. You have to give them something which is going to clear the path for them. That is what the scout cruisers were for. That is what they were. They were the edge. They were the tribal class destroyers before the tribal class destroyers of World War II, not the World War I ones. Their job was not to be massive, was not to be threatening and intimidating to other nations when they go on national visits. No, their job was to shepherd, nurture, protect a pack of destroyers through the fire and get them to make them have a chance of getting a hit. In many respects, their role was to act as a shield for their charges. And yet, honestly, they were barely any better protected than their charges. In fact, they really weren't any better protected than their charges. Right, before we get into this, there's a link down below because, well, I started this yesterday. You're allowed to have it running for 30 days when I record this. Yesterday when I recorded this, which was Sunday the 20th of February. And it's already reached that. And that's very kind of you all. And, well, there's a link down below. It's me funding for going the HMCS Haida trip. I have had some funding. I'm only putting in some money myself, and I've put this up, and I'm getting nagged by various people because of the figure. I started out putting up £1,200 as the limit, and then when it quickly got to this, I have to admit I did up the limit because, well, I just thought it was sensible. And I'm not sure if it allows you to go over the limit, and I don't know. I've never done this sort of thing on PayPal before, and it's very kind and very generous of everyone, so thank you. And hopefully I'll make my target. And what I'll be doing is I'll be using that towards the accommodation and costs on the there, and the other money's going towards the accommodation costs, and everything's going towards that. And I think I have to pay something for the filming rights at Haida. They were still talking about actually how much that is going to be, whether it's going to be a nominal fee or whether it's going to be about 500 Canadian dollars or something like that. And thank you. So that's what I've worked it all out. Hiring a car, going to Haida, and we're also going to go Sackville and have to sort out any details for costs there. And yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be very, very good. And it's all thanks to all of you. So none of this would be happening if it wasn't for you who've subscribed to Patreon, who subscribed to the channel, who are contributing to this, who watch the channel. So thank you, everyone. Now we'll get on to the topic of today. So, forward class. They're rather gorgeous, aren't they, in some respects? In other respects, they look a bit like... It's going to get me into so much trouble. A couple of pair of Croc sort of shoes have been put heel to heel. I think they're called Crocs. I'm terrible. The smart shoes that guys wear, which don't have laces and anything. They look like slippers made of leather. I never quite understand it. It's never been my style. But that's what they sort of remind me of. That they look like that. And they are part of the original development of what the Royal Navy wanted. The Royal Navy had come with the idea that they wanted a lots of options. This is one of the things. The Royal Navy does the reverse of the LCS decision. So the LCS were supposed to build 2 of each, and then they were going to test them out, and then they'd go and award the contract to someone else. Now, what the Royal Navy did was they commissioned several. They put out a tender. They invited yards to all build 2 of them on the process that they would build a lot more later. And they ended up building the successive ones themselves in their Royal Navy dockyard. But the forward class are what come from Fairfield Shipping and Engineering Company. They were armed with 12-pounders. They had a couple of torpedoes. It's a very successful program for the Royal Navy. They get all these ships built, and everyone's going, oh, where's the massive order going to come? And then the Royal Navy just goes, nah, we're going to nick all the good ideas and build it ourselves. We think we can do it better and cheaper. And no one sues them. Again, these have triple expansion steam engines, which explains the funnels. It also explains some of the hull shaping. And if you're looking at this hull and you're going, Alex, that almost looks Zamultian, there is certainly something in this forward class hull design which is special. It's certainly quite unique-ish lines for them. They were laid down, both of them in October 1903, and they're both in service by 1905, August and September 1905. And the 2 sisters would be Forward and Foresight. So, here are the stats. 2,896 tons. 111.3 meters between their perpendiculars. A beam of 11.9 meters, and a draft of 4.3 meters. They had 12 Thornycroft boilers supplying 16,500 indicated horsepower via 2 triple expansion engines to 2 shafts for a top speed of 25 knots, or a range of 3,400 nautical miles at 10 knots. Their complement was 289, which feels so many when you compare think about how big they are versus the size of a modern destroyer and the fact that that has less crew. Armament included 10 single, quick-firing 12-pounder, 3-inch 76mm guns, 8 single, quick-firing 3-pounder 47mm guns, and 2 single 18-inch 450mm torpedo tubes. A waterline belt they had was 2 inches thick. And deck, well, that was between 15.9 and 28.6 millimeters of what I'm going with, because I'm not trying to read out those inches. 0.625 inches and 1.1125. And a 3-inch thick conning tower, which, what can I say? Seems like a waste of steel to me, but I can understand why for this case. They spent most of their first decade of service in reserve. I know. That's what the Royal Navy does. This is quite common for navies at this period. You buy a ship, it's fine, it's good. Do we need it right now? Nope, into reserve. That's what you have the Royal Navy Reserve for. That's what you put officers into reserve for. You send off, it's one of the great things about having a larger reserve force is you not only have reserve officers, but you have your regular officers, and you go, right then, well, I can afford to, I will have a slightly bigger establishment than I need for all the ships. And then if you want to go off and do a PhD or tour the world with your family or do something else, for a few months, you're more than welcome to it. And while you're doing it, you're technically assigned to this reserve ship. And if there's a war, you'll get called back and you'll be on the reserve ship. That's fine. It works. And I should add that the waterline belt that was 2 inches thick at the machinery spaces. There is some very interesting discussions about how thick it is at other points. They carried a maximum of 508 tons of coal. And this is what gave them their range of 3,400 nautical miles at 10 knots, because that's burning their coal, an average burn required for 10 knots, 3,400 nautical miles, because they have the 508 tons. The problem for scout cruisers, and this is something which is going to make a lot of you laugh, is of course they are designed from the outset to try and protect the destroyers. But the destroyers keep getting faster, and 25 knots is not great. The thing I find it most interesting when I look at the scout cruisers is they didn't use them as a test bed for turbine power. Honestly, I think if they'd gone with turbines, they could probably have got them up to more than 25 knots. You're probably talking 30 plus knot ships. And they could have been very interesting in that formation. Do I think they've had a bigger impact on Model 1 than they did? No. They did have an impact on World War 1, and Forward class are definitely part of World War 1. So they're built by the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company. And you're sitting there going, Alex, that's not an old ship on the construction. That's a modern Type 26 destroyer, Type 26 frigate, global combat ship, something or other that the Royal Navy is building. Are you sure you're right? Yes! That's the shipyard. They were built in the same shipyard which has now, through many, many conversions, become BAE system surface ships where the Type 26s are being built. And also, where I think the Type 45s and the Bay class were built. They are fun times. This is the same yard which has built things like Indomitable, New Zealand, Renown, Commonwealth, Valiant, Howe, Liverpool, Norfolk, Chameleon, Comet, Goldfinch, all sorts of things. Goodness knows how many submarines, Implacable and Theseus, the aircraft carriers, all sorts of gorgeous passenger ships and other things. They just built a lot of stuff. They even built icebreakers at this yard. They were around for a long time. They were in existence from 1834 to 1968, i.e., 134 years. They are a very interesting and very capable company, and they produce very good ships, which the Royal Navy was very lucky to have. They really were. So, HMS Forward. And if I didn't while watching this, this is on the Wikipedia side, so I'm presuming it's now fair use. And it is from World War One. Definitely from, actually, I think possibly from pre-World War One, this picture. HMS Forward has an interesting career. She was present when the Germans bombarded Hartlepool, although I'm not going to get into that one with her, because I'm going to do that with HMS Patrol. Yes, it is HMS Patrol. And she was also present at the beginning of the First World War off the coast of Belgium and doing things there and doing coastal defence duties on the east coast of England. And she took part in the Mediterranean, the Aegean Sea, and she served until she was scrapped in 1921. She was a useful ship. She's laid down in October 1903. She's launched in August 1904 and commissioned in September 1905. She spends most of her career with the 4th Destroyer Flotilla and the 3rd Destroyer Flotilla. She does do a little bit of time with the 2nd Destroyer Flotilla, and her war service is mostly with the 7th and 9th Destroyer Flotillas. Although she, along with other scout cruisers, are formed into the 6th Light Cruiser Squadron in 1915. Their role is to guard the East Coast against Zeppelin raids. Someone had a bright idea pre-radar, that's all I can say. What is really interesting about HMS Forward is the caliber of the officer she gets in charge of her. And I'm going to give you an interesting example. So, this is, at the time when he's aboard, Captain Arthur Bedford, who later goes on to become a Vice Admiral. While he's in charge of her, Forward actually rescues members of the Tolstoy family. Yes, that family from Russia. From Odessa, where they were about to be captured by Bolsheviks in early 1919. She's part of the deployment in that region. Now, why is Arthur Bedford an interesting officer? Well, okay. He served on the Charybdis as a midshipman. He'd been a sub-lieutenant by 1900, lieutenant by 1902, did the signal course at Naval School of Technology at HMS Victory, and then was appointed lieutenant to Vice Admiral Arthur Dalrymple Fanshawe, who was, of course, commander-in-chief of the Australia Station at that point, and posted to the Royal Arthur. He reached rank of commander in the beginning of World War One, and was second in command of HMS Kent, a Monmouth-class cruiser, at the Battle of Falkland Islands in December 1914. during which, of course, Kent sank the Königsberg-class cruiser SMS Nürnberg. He then joined the staff of the Dover Patrol, and in early 1919 he gets command of HMS Forward. For 2 years, he's naval assistant to the Second Sea Lord. Then in 1926, he's appointed captain of the fleet in the Mediterranean Fleet. In 1928, he took command of the Royal Navy depot at Devonport. Then he's given command of the battlecruiser HMS Tiger. In 1931, he's appointed aide-de-camp to the King, and then promoted rear admiral. And 1932 to 34, he served as chief of staff to Vice Admiral Sir William Fisher in the Mediterranean. Then 1934 to 37, he's flag officer commanding the Royal Indian Navy. Promoted to Vice Admiral in 1936, he retires in November 1937 and rejoins the Navy before Abracadabra War and serves again throughout the war. Turns to the retired list in 1945. And now I'm going to say the bit which can make me, for a British person, very emotional. In 1914, he'd married Gladys Mort, daughter, an Australian girl, and they had one son, Frederick. Now, Frederick is born in 1920. They marry in 1914, but they don't manage to spend enough time together, aren't lucky, and they only have one child in 1920. He had a lot of respect for Australia. His father had been governor of Western Australia from 1903 to 1909, and he, of course, had served out there. His son joins the Fleet Air Arm and is a lieutenant in the Fleet Air Arm on active service over Malta in February 1942, where he is killed. I'm not quite sure about the details of his wife. I think she precedes him in dying, but I do know when Arthur Bedford dies, and he has done all this service for the Royal Navy, but he hadn't got to see his son's grave. He had served through the whole of World War II, did his duty for his country. In 1949, the Royal Navy manages to get him a spot on HMS Newcastle, who takes him out to Malta. And he goes to visit his son's grave. He sees his son's grave, and as the story I've been told, that night he dies on board HMS Newcastle. He was a very good officer and a very loyal one, who served far more than he needed to, and earned his status as, when he was naval advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of India and all those things, he definitely earned his Order of the Bath, his companion of the Order of the Bath, and the Order of the Star of India. He also wrote a book. Well, it's published in. He wrote The Royal Indian Navy in a Naval Review of May 1938, and was an ardent and forthright campaigner for an increased, enhanced, and more capable Indian Navy. I'm fairly sure if he'd had his way, and if World War II had held off till 1942, the Royal Indian Navy therein would have been far stronger than it was. And then we're on to HMS Foresight. Foresight, well, she's slightly younger than her sister. And she gets scrapped slightly earlier. The other one, Forward makes it in 1921. Foresight only makes it in 1920. She's laid down in 1903, October, and is launched October 1904, and is commissioned August 1905, which is rather cool if you think about it, because no, she's commissioned September 1905. I do love it when my own notes disagree, so I'm going to go with September 1905 because I think it's September. I don't know. Because forward was August. Now, she weighs in roughly the same as her sister and is pretty much very similar to her sister, and has a sort of similar service experience. She's placed into reserve in the Portsmouth Division of the Home Fleet from completion until October 1909. From there, she joins the 2nd Destroyer Flotilla as its leader. In 1910, she's transferred to the 3rd Destroyer Flotilla. Then in 1911, the 6th Destroyer Flotilla. Remember, the 6th is usually a pretty good name to be part of. As a rule, if the Royal Navy has 2 crack destroyer flotillas, it's the 4th and the 6th. No idea why, but also the 10th. Basically, if you hear you are anywhere near the 4th, the 6th, or the 10th destroyer flotillas in World War I or World War II, and you are the enemy, your best bet is to turn around and get away. I have no idea what it is about those particular flotillas, but look at the war records of them, and they have those Royal Navy flotillas have a fairly good consistent record across them, but those 3 have an absurdly consistent record in some respects. Between 1911 and 1912, her main guns were replaced by 4-inch guns, 9 of them, arranged 4 on each broadside and 1 on the quarterdeck, to give her sort of almost a 5-gun broadside. She's reduced again to reserve in early 1912, and while still technically being in reserve, she manages to collide with a destroyer, HMS Falcon, in November 1913. With the start of the First World War, she's put into the Dover Patrol, then the 8th Destroyer Flotilla as part of the Dover Patrol. She took part in the Battle of Ypres. I'll be getting into her role there. And in May 1915, she's temporarily transferred to the 6th Light Cruiser Squadron on the Humber, guarding as the Zeppelins for her sister. And then in 1915, she's sent off to the Aegean. And in November 1916, she would be part of the ships which would assist with HMHS, Her Majesty's hospital ship, Britannic, when it is sunk by a mine. She's paid off in June 1919 and sold for scrap in March 1920, as said. She's a good-looking ship, though, isn't she? So, the Battle of Ypres. Now, I have before talked about the Battle of Ypres and the role the Belgians play in holding up and protecting their territory and trying to hold off the massive advancing German forces. And I've also discussed in the past the involvement of monitors in this. Getting as close as they can. Getting really up close into the beach. Well, they are helped in this by HMS Foresight, who pretty much, how do I put this politely, signals to the monitors for them to get in as close as they can and not to worry about enemy destroyers. Because, in the words of her commanding officer at the time, this is reported in a couple of papers, but doesn't seem to have any actual record, so we'll consider it could be mildly paper talk, that any enemy ship, torpedo boat, which tries to get past, if he has no shells, he will ram. which, considering the relative speeds, would have been interesting because I think most of the German torpedo boats could probably outpace his 25 knots. But he'd probably do a good job. And besides, by this point, he does have 9 4-inch guns, so yeah, there isn't much that's like getting past him. And it's the important thing, because having these ships establishing local sea control allows the monitors, and to an extent supported by the firepower from the cruisers when they were within range, to move in close and attack the German troops and support the Belgian troops ashore. And it's the two things work together. Sea control in itself is not an end. You control the sea, great, what are you going to do with it? That's the question. You control it, what are you going to do with it? What? Well, I'm going to use it to support the troops ashore and bombard enemy positions. That's using the sea. I'm going to transport goods and move convoys and economy, keep my economy going. That's control. That's using the sea. I'm going to deny my opponent the ability to do the same. That is using sea control. Control the sea is not an end to. It is not an end in of itself. It's a means to an end, because it allows you to do all those other things. She's, of course, involved in the sinking of Britannic. And the interesting thing about the sort of Britannic is, of course, the Germans get into a lot of trouble because this is a hospital ship. And there are so many things. It was sunk by torpedo attack. We are fairly certain, well, as certain as anyone can be, that she was sunk by a mine. What we know is that it was not a torpedo. We do know, as best as we can know for the period, that it was a mine laid by SMU 73 over a month earlier, on the 21st of October 1916. She was under command of Gustav Sieb, and of course, as usual, German mine-laying subs were some of the most effective weapons they had. Now, claiming, though, that she'd been torpedoed is, of course, a great thing for propaganda purposes, despite it being cruel for the public and the people aboard to think they've been torpedoed, because it's torpedoing a great big hospital ship. Her Majesty's hospital ship, Britannic, sister of the Titanic. On 08/12, on 21st November 1916, a loud explosion shook the ship. No one knew what it was. But there are a list of issues. For starters, there are portholes open, which tend to be blamed on nurses, but could have just been, as much as well, could have been patients who were hot. The explosion itself disrupts various bulkheads and causes issues with watertight compartments, and even stops the radio mast from receiving signals, even though it's able to still transmit. This means that, well, she's designed to have certain sections flooded and still be able to stay afloat. The trouble is, with watertight compartments filling with water, the boilerman's tunnel connecting the fireman's quarters in the bow with the boiler room, with boiler room 6, was seriously damaged, and water was flowing into that boiler room as a result. And the watertight doors that were supposed to close didn't all close all the way. It was specifically the watertight door between boiler rooms 6 and 5 failed to close properly. It was calculated Britannic could stay afloat motionless with 6 watertight compartments flooded, as there were 5 watertight bulkheads rising all the way up to B deck, and theoretically, the ones that were in there should have been enough to protect her, and she should have not been filling up with water enough. However, the porthole, as she dips down, and the portholes which are open let in water. This is why I can understand why some naval architects hate portholes. That's an extra few feet of clearance between you and the water sea level before it starts flying in the sides of your ship. It's not good. Only 50 people though are lost. There are reasons for this. One, various warships react very quickly. Foresight isn't the first to get there. That is a fisherman from Key in their cake. And then HMS Scourge turns up, and then HMS Heroic, finally then Foxhound, and then Foresight turns up. And Foresight is important because Foresight is this cruiser which is capable and also brings along with it quite a senior officer who starts organizing people. And that is also useful for the area. A relatively senior officer turns up. It makes it easier to coordinate things. Meet guy in charge of cruiser. Meet captain. Now, it could have been more issue if there'd been something like Philip V in there, but we'll leave that on one side. She's a rather sad loss. But it's testimony to the effect of mines. That they could be laid and they were still taking out ships a month or so later. You thought an area was safe, and actually mines would be lurking for ages. So summary. Forward class. Oh, Fairfield do a good construction job, don't they? They are nice looking ships. The trouble with the scout cruisers is not really their concept or their design, it's their specification. If someone had specified them for more than 25 knots, you can guarantee they'd have had turbines. 25 knots was about the maximum speed you could get up to on triple expansion engines in this sized hull. About the maximum. And it was fine for the pre-Dreadnought era. But the moment Dreadnought comes out in 1905 and it's 21-knot battleship, everything jumps up. Your cruisers suddenly have to go faster, your destroyers have to go faster still, and things are left behind. People often look at it and go, but Dreadnought, she's only a 3-knot advantage over the pre-Dreads because they do 18 knots. Those 3 knots are a big jump. Those 3 knots make a world of difference. Because if you can sustain 21 knots, you are going on a lot faster. You can overtake someone doing 18 knots. And suddenly, if I need to be the cruiser that is protecting and scouting ahead of you, I need to be even faster because I need to be able to zip back and round. I need to be able to come back and go ahead. So, well, 25 knots is fine when the battleships do 18. That's a 7-knot advantage. A little over a third. If I want to do the same role when I'm dealing with a 21-knot battleship, well, it's 28 knots, maybe 29 needed. That's a big jump. It makes a difference. It makes a difference in what ship you need. It makes a difference in what the ship is going to do. The forward class are very good for 1903. And they do good service in World War One. But I think the scout cruisers as a whole, and I'm slowly building up to this conclusion when we get through to the final one of the classes, the scout cruisers as a whole have this problem. The Tender, a design capable of 25 knots, protected deck, a range of 2,000 nautical miles, and an armament of 6 quick-firing 12-pounder guns. and 8 3-pounder guns, and 2 18-inch torpedo tubes. That's its baseline. And I can, at one point, see why the Royal Navy has specified for such a basic baseline. It's very difficult for anyone to muck that up. But at the same point, and at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why? This is a Royal Navy which is on the cusp of a revolution. And they know it. Okay, we could argue that being developed between 1901 and 1902 means that they are before it, but the RN's pushing working turbines at this point. I'd have thought if any ships should have been specified for something which is going to require them to use turbines, it would have been the scout cruisers. They're ordering 8 ships from 4 companies. That's a lot more than you need to test a concept. That is, you have providing enough ships for what you need, pretty much. So why aren't you pushing the envelope more on the tech? The only answer I come up with is that while these are the first generation of torpedo boat destroyers, in terms of the new ones, light cruiser type, or evolve into light cruiser type, they aren't it. The RN doesn't think they're it. They are testing out the concept. They don't think the war's going to come anytime soon, but they need to start working out the concept before they do order it in really large numbers. And then I start to look at these as paving the way for what becomes the Town class, and then the C class, and then the D class, and the E class. And then they might start to make sense. Not as an ends, rather like sea control, they are a means to the ends. They are a starting point for what will come. They're the RN going, this is our technological baseline. Let's push from here. And by getting so many yards involved in it, you immediately spread out the knowledge. You immediately have not just a baseline established, but a knowledge baseline established across multiple yards and in multiple regions. So they can see, they can start thinking. And this is important. When you're trying to mold and propel forward a large maritime industrial base, sometimes something like this makes a lot of sense on a strategic level. And that's what I think these scout cruisers were. Interesting ships. Really are interesting ships. And what have we got coming up? We have the Norfolk class next week, and then we have the Königsberg class, and then the Glorious Heritage class. Glorious Heritage has been recorded for ages. And then we have the Pathfinder class. Woohoo! And then 29th of March. Which I'm sure I have filled out and worked out somewhere. I'm sure I've got it listed somewhere. But not apparent in this one. This is the problem with writing some of these a long time before I actually produce them. I forget to go and update this. Ah, well. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed, and take care. And I should add, thank you for everyone who's subscribed. Thank you for everyone who's watched the videos. Thank you for everyone who's a patron and suggesting topics for patron. And thank you to everyone who's joined the channel. Thank you to everyone who's contributing to the Hide a Trip. And look out tomorrow. This is coming out on the Tuesday. Friday's video from last week has been delayed and is coming out tomorrow on Wednesday. Hope you enjoyed. Take care and have fun.